People who have interviewed potential new hires. What are some of the weirdest or worst things you've encountered during the interview? 1. Handed in her resume in person. This is an important detail for later. She seemed normal enough, looking for a part-time job. She was new to the area and was checking out opportunities. This is a grocery store she was applying to. 2. Called me the day before, panicking, asking for directions to our location. It didn't seem like she knew she was talking to us, as she was asking directions to the store. Now she was here yesterday dropping off her resume. 3. Called to say she was going to be late, because she forgot about an appointment. 3. Called to reschedule the interview for same time day as the interview. She seemed to think it was a different day. 4. Called asking which bus to take to the interview. 5. Called to reschedule again. 6. Showed up 4 hours early, wearing 2 different shoes. Each time she called, she sounded more and more drunk. It was sad. She clearly needed help. Next story, crying. She explained that she just cries sometimes for no real reason, and I accepted her explanation. She was a good hire. I would swing by her office, and sometimes she would be in there crying and working away. She was a graphic designer. This was at a design firm and was referred by someone I trust. 12 years on, she has 3 kids and sounds good. Next story. I used to be the hiring manager for a store in a mall. Our back room was pretty tiny, so we did interviews in the food court. Usually it was pretty empty when it wasn't around lunch, dinner time, so it wasn't hard to find a table that was far enough away from everyone else. I was midway through interviewing someone when I saw a girl I didn't recognize walking towards us. She came over, sat down with us, put a little white pill on the table and said, "Take this pill," to the guy interviewing. Then she asked if I wanted one, without actually saying what it was. When I said no, she started asking how I knew her friend. I told her I worked at a store and was interviewing him for a job, and she just said, "Oh, cool," and just continued to sit there. It took a few minutes for the guy to get it through to her that we weren't friends who met during an interview, but that this was the interview that she had crashed. Once she finally got it, she picked up the pill, got up, and wandered away. Next story. Guy who said on his resume that he took inspiration from sea captains as his management style. We interviewed him, and he was very good at giving long, rambling soliloquies that didn't answer our questions. He didn't get the job, but I wonder what he's doing these days. Next story. Interviewing for student workers at a college bookstore. So we got a pretty wild variety of characters, but none like Lorenzo. This dude comes walking into the interview in some tattered cargo shorts, a dirty white tee, some flappy broken sandals, long mangy hair, and a scraggly beard. But the best part was the gourd. This mug, no joke, had a good-sized gourd hanging from a hemp necklace around his neck that he was using for a water bottle. Now, the assistant director and I both have a pretty solid sense of humor, and we know this interview is going to be special. We began asking him all the usual questions. Why do you want to work here? What were your favorite past jobs? All of which he answered really well, far beyond our expectations. At the end, we always had a fun questing in there as well. We asked Lorenzo if he could go anywhere right now. Where would he go? Amazon. I would go to the Amazon, and got up and started dancing around the office. I'd go do a rain dance in the rainforest. Man, I want to go so bad. And then he pounded the gourd. Best interview ever. Sadly, our executive director flat out no'd Lorenzo. The AD and I were tragically disappointed. We really wanted to give him the job, just to see what happened. He became a bit of a campus legend, and we really did regret not being part of his journey. Rumor has it that after graduation, he boarded a plane to South America and was never heard from again. Dance on, buddy. Dance on. Next story. The one that stands out the most to me was hiring for a new computer tech. Was a nice guy, seemed to know the basics but was clearly new to the field. When I asked if he had any questions for me, his first one was, "What is the process for transferring to a new position? I'm only applying here because there aren't any openings in accounting." Yeah, dude. Tell me right away you don't really want that job and don't intend to stay at it. I just looked at him blankly for about 15 or 20 seconds, and I think it dawned on him what he just did. The interview basically ended there, and I thanked him for his time and said I wouldn't be calling. I hope he learned from that. Next story. I have so many. One of my favorites was an early morning interview at a large job fair the company I had just been hired to was hosting at our local convention center. This candidate has been there the night before and completed her application and some assessments, and was asked to come back in the morning to interview. She was drunk, y'all. Not hungover, hiccuping, slurring, stinking drunk. She tried to hug me rather than shaking my hand. It was another woman and I doing the interview. She asked the candidate why she had left her last job, and she said, in the absolute hickest of accents, "Well, it's like this, you see. Me and my old man, we was getting a divorce. So then I started sleeping with a whole bunch of guys at the office. Then me and my old man, we got back together, and now I'm not allowed to work there no more." Next story. I was 25 years old interviewing a woman twice my age who brought her dog. I asked her to tell me about a time she dealt with a difficult customer and how she resolved it. She proceeded to tell me about when she worked as a receptionist of the spa at a casino and how a drunk woman who was getting a massage started behaving very inappropriately and refused to stop. Next story. I once was a warehouse recruiter, so you don't necessarily get the best candidates to begin with. One guy I asked, "Do you have anything on your background? Because we will be doing a background check." He said, "No." At the end of the interview, I asked again. I said, "Tell me now, because we will be doing a background check." Says, "Nope." Background check comes back, and guess what? Sure enough, it's not clean. Guy has a serious crime against a minor charge on him. Like, man, come on, really? You have a very small chance of getting hired anywhere, and a 0% chance when you try and lie about it. Next story. I was interviewing someone who casually mentioned that one of their dogs had died after being left in the car during her workday. She then went on to ask if we have a place where she could keep her dogs at work. We do not. To which she replied that that's okay. They could stay in the car. We were hiring for a dog trainer position. Next story. Not majorly weird, but always stood out to me. I was on the interview panel with the owner and project manager, as I was in charge of training new hires. Guy comes in wearing skinny jeans and skater trainers. Already I know the owner is annoyed because he's a stickler for dress code. Shirt, trousers, shoes, in the office. His CV says he's already experienced in what we do, so we ask him some basic questions about the work he's done, and he gives some vague answers that don't really explain anything or indicate any real experience. Partway through the interview, the owner says that I'd be training him should he be successful, and he very obviously sneered and rolled his eyes. At the end of the interview, when asked if he had any questions, he said he likes going to gym, so he'd like 2 lunch breaks because of the amount of food he needs to eat, and also to actually get to the gym. Owner says we can discuss that if he's successful. Project manager and I didn't want him, but owner said we should invite him back for the second stage competency test and asked if I could contact him because he noticed the eye rolling. Owner also makes a comment about him being scruffy and tells me to make sure he comes dressed for work. I invite him back and tell him exactly the sort of thing he's expected to wear. He turns up a week later wearing the exact same stuff from his interview. It's clear during the quite simple competency test that he's barely done this type of work before, if at all. Ask him at the end if he's got any questions, and he asks what other responsibilities I had because I obviously wouldn't need to spend much time training him. Sidestep that, and he repeats the question about 2 lunch breaks. Owner phoned him the next day to tell him he wasn't successful, and he offered his services on a freelance basis for both work and training, even sending a follow-up email offering the same thing a few days later. Forgot to mention that he also turned up with 2 large tubs of pasta for the competency test and stopped partway to eat one of them, despite only being there for 2 hours, which was supposed to be an upper limit. Next story. Interviewed this lady who seemed okay, but we didn't hire her. Then she keeps emailing me, asking questions about the job, after she knew we hired someone else. Then she emailed me asking to meet up and hang out. Next story. I was interviewing a graduating senior for an entry-level designer position, a position that would have required her to work closely with a writing partner and less directly with an entire team. I asked her how she approached working in teams, and she said, "Oh, I hate working in teams. Every time I do, everyone ends up ganging up on me, so I want to work alone here. Might as well have just ended the interview then and there, because that's not and never will be how advertising works." I pointed out her portfolio and asked her how she'd created those pieces. Hadn't she worked with a writer on the headlines or the body copy? She said no. Her professor let her do everything herself because she'd told him she refused to work with anyone. I can't remember what school she went to, but they did her a massive disservice by letting her think that was normal. Next story. I wasn't on this panel, but an older man being interviewed responded to 2 of his questions with, "That's a stupid question," and "You tell me, you work here." Needless to say, he didn't get the job. Another man bought lunch at the time of his interview and then complained he was being disturbed when someone went to call him through. Entitled weirdos. Next story. I once had a new hire who harassed me. In the beginning, she seemed very well, and me and my team really thought about giving her the job. But when we invited her to make her an offer, it happened. We went to the meeting room. I work in a small company with a small office, so the meeting room wasn't that big. But then, after she did some strange things like picking something up and put her behind in my face and putting her top down more and more, she crawled under my table and wanted to give me a you-know-what. I instantly stood up and sent her away. In the end, we found someone else for the job. I mean, she was hot, but in my opinion, things like this shouldn't happen at work. Next story. I worked in HR for a long time. I was usually the first person new hires went through for admin jobs. I interviewed one guy who was creepy beyond words, winking at me, biting his lip. At the end he said, "Well, I'm pretty sure I blew this interview, but would you hire me for a date?" I told him he has 30 seconds to leave before security was called. Next story. I had a 24-year-old college graduate come into the interview with her father. I had multiple interviewees, so when I called her name and they both stood up, I told him it wasn't a group interview and he'd be in when his name was called. He looked at me and said, "I'm her father. I'll be sitting in on her interview." I looked at both of them and said that wasn't happening, and he was not welcome to join us in the interview room unless he was an applicant on my list. He literally took her by the hand and walked her out. That was 8 years ago or so, and I still think about that poor woman. I was 25 at the time and couldn't imagine that being my life. Close second was the woman who came in and apologized for being late because her medication program clinic appointment took longer than usual. Next story. Weird in other countries, but not in Ireland. It's not uncommon for the local parish priest to give a reference for people going for their first job. I had never encountered it myself when I first took a job at a recruitment agency, but I quickly learned that it's quite common. Next story. Interviewed a young guy for an IT support job. He wouldn't have got the job because he had no idea about appropriate presentation, and he kept swearing in the interview. But the weirdest thing was, he kept asking for details about our network security and firewalls and network switches, etc. I'm not sure if there was supposed to be some subtle threat that, if I don't get the job, I'm gonna hack you, but it made everyone even more dubious about the guy's intentions. Next story. I was an admin at this construction company when a guy came in for an interview. He brought his cats with him. We had to put them, they were crated, in an empty office near my desk. They were so loud, I had people coming to my desk to figure out what was going on. Weird day. Next story. Guy I worked with disappeared for a few days, and then it transpired he got arrested and had to do time, like a month or so. There were lots of rumors, but in the end, HR decided he had not done anything that hurt the company, so he was allowed to keep his job. Truth be told, he was extremely good at it. We never found out what he was arrested for, though. Somewhat later, I became this guy's manager. He then developed a feud with a coworker over a trivial issue. Well, trivial for the whole office, but not him. This festered for 2 years. He became unmanageable, was given a new direct manager a few times, but nothing worked. He became obsessed with the injustice he was exposed to and shouted in the corridors that this company was F-I'd him in the A. In the end, he admitted that he could not get over the fact that I, his manager at the time, allowed the facts he was upset about to happen. He also kept a massive diary with text and sketches and insisted I read it to understand what was eating him. Due to labor laws, it was not easy to get him fired, but we managed to do so in the end. But I left out one little detail. When I became this guy's manager, HR told me why he got arrested. It turned out to be buying and trading illegal content involving minors in it. Okay, so this not came out of an interview. But guess who applied for a job with me a few months ago? The Audacity. Next story. I once had an opposing attorney who went MIA for a few weeks. Just disappeared. Missing persons reports, news articles, firm doesn't know where she is, the whole 9 yards. Then she was found at some hippie retreat a few hours away. Apparently, she decided she needed some time away while she was driving to a hearing and just kept driving for a few days until she found her way there. Apparently, she didn't take the most direct route, totally abandoned her client without a word. Well, a few years later, I was at a different firm and was asked to interview a candidate. Looked at the resume, thought, that name sounds familiar, but didn't have time to place it. As soon as she walked in, we both recognized each other, and I could tell she knew she wasn't getting this job before the interview even started. Next story. Not an interview, but yesterday I received a resume that said, I really think it's time for business and companies to change the way they hire everyone. I've been out of work over 4 years already, and it's getting ridiculous. I may have not grown up in, but I am more than qualified for all the jobs I applied for. Next story. Young guy interviewed for a really well-paid IT admin position. Got all the qualifications we were looking for and made a really good impression to all of us. More or less got the job. Interview was close to its end. Just to let you know, I'm not planning to work in IT for the rest of my life. I want to start a career as a rapper. I'm getting quite popular on YouTube already. Oh, wow. Can you show us? 3 songs released. Less than 1,000 views. But whatever. Yet every second sentence was how he will catch and kill those bitches. Just pure aggressive hate speech. Thanks for showing up. You will hear from us. Next story. I was interviewing a woman for a management position at a tech firm in the South. There was really no mention of a job on her resume, so I asked her about her experience managing people. In her sweetest Southern Belle drawl, she told me that she managed the groundskeeper, the cleaning personnel, and the household staff. After I got my wits about me, I asked if she had technical experience with computers. When she admitted no, I told her that I was sorry, but that was a major requirement of the job. Next story. I have interviewed lots of people, but don't recall anything weirdly noteworthy. Most of the weirdness showed up after they were hired. My wife once had someone show up to an interview for a corporate job escorted by his mother, who tried to come into her office and sit in on it. The guy was in his early 20s and was not disabled or anything, as far as she knew. He didn't seem too keen on getting the position, and in fact, did not get it. His mother called my wife for the next few weeks wanting to know why he wasn't hired, asking for another interview, asking about open positions in any other departments. It was insane. My wife had a few choice words with the HR rep who put this guy through, as well as her boss having stronger words with the head of security for his guards letting this woman in the building. Next story. Nothing too crazy. You can tell when people get nervous by long-winded and unending sentences to sell themselves, or they go blank when having to answer a question. I found that you got a better feel for the candidate by having decent interviewing skills. Put them at ease, seem personable, allow them to relax. I think if you get them in a place where they are comfortable, you get a better response or read off of what they bring to the table. People that are jerks to interviewees or do stump the chump bullshit are probably people you don't want to work for. Next story. The weirdest was someone falling asleep at the beginning of an interview. We were interviewing about 45 people for 10 positions, so we documented all the answers and scored them to make selections easier at the end of the week. This guy walks in, we do introductions, and give him a minute to read over the questions we will be asking while we start our paperwork. By the time the minute is up, this dude is out cold. No idea how you can walk in a room, sit in front of 5 people and be relaxed enough to fall asleep. Next story. These are different people, but some of my favorite moments from my interviewing days. What's one mistake you've made and how did you address it? Well, one time I was a camp counselor, and me and my friend were trying to start a fire, but we couldn't find the lighter fluid. So we sprayed bug spray all over the fire pit and then lit it and, well, that was a mistake. What sort of team environment do you prefer? I hate teams. I'm fine alone. Most people don't like me, but that's fine. People are too sensitive these days too. That's why I won't work with anyone under 35. You get it? I bet you hate working with all these 20-somethings. I was 25. Why do you want this job? My husband's being a real difficult person and says I need to work. It's not like we need the money. He's just an asshole. Please upload your cover letter. Okay, here's 6 pages about how your web design is mess. He did not get an interview, but honorable mention. What is your greatest professional accomplishment? I was in an episode of Seinfeld, and an honorable mention to the time I was conducting a phone interview and had the hiccups. Nothing was working to get rid of them, and I have these horrible, super loud hiccups that sound like I'm screaming. The interviewee managed valiantly not to laugh at me once. Straight into the higher pile he goes. Next story. A young girl took a big pause after I asked a question, then replied, "Could we reschedule this? It was my friend's birthday last night. I'm too hungover to process what you're asking right now." Next story. We did panel interviews, so like 4 to 6 supervisors interviewing you together. A guy shows up, looking profesh and upbeat. Just before the interview starts, he runs to the restroom, vomiting, but still wants to interview. 10 minutes later, still vomiting. We offer to reschedule, but he really wants the job and wants to do the interview. Another 15 minutes, still vomiting, and we called it off. Couldn't hold up the entire middle management of a pretty big company any longer. He came in a few days later and got the job. Next story. One other one. When interviewing people for a software development position, we would start with entry-level technical questions to warm them up and increase the complexity up to and beyond the level of the position. 2 reasons. 1. To ensure they have the appropriate skills and experience. 2. By stressing them beyond what they would reasonably be expected to know, we find out how they handle stress, if they'll try to BS us, and such. One guy turned the tables on us, knew his stuff, didn't BS us on the limits of his knowledge, and was absolutely unrattled by our, feeble as it turns out, attempts to stress him. We decided to hire him right there. Got to the friendly shooting the breeze stage of the interview, having already decided he was a yes, and asked him what he used to do. Resume just listed U.S. military experience. Turns out he used to be a driver of an armed escort, patrol vehicle in Iraq during the war. No wonder we couldn't rattle him. A couple of geeks in a conference room was nothing. He turned out to be a great hire. Next story. I was a programmer interviewing other programmers. Our process involved taking a test on site and then doing an in-person interview. I got a guy's resume, looked really solid, like 10 years at Samsung doing big things, senior engineer, high-level stuff, although none of it was super relevant to us since we were a game studio. Whatever, we'll chat with him. As I went to do the in-person interview, my manager pulled me aside and said, somehow the test machine failed or something, so we didn't get a test result for him. So make sure you really get down in the weeds on his interview. Okay, that's very weird. It's worked for every other candidate, but hey, whatever. I get in there, and there's this guy with stringy gray hair wearing ratty clothing. I introduce myself, and the minute he goes to answer me, I notice he's missing his top 4 front teeth. This is a guy who, based on his resume, has been making 6 figures for years while simultaneously having full medical benefits. But I scold myself. You don't know what's going on here. There might be a medical reason he can't wear a bridge. You should be ashamed of yourself making assumptions. Then I started the interview, and it was clear within 2 minutes that this guy's resume was made up, or more likely, stolen. He knew basically nothing about programming at all. It was like he had maybe skimmed through a textbook. It got really awkward really quickly, and we ended the hour-long interview within 20 minutes. The crazy part was this guy was interviewing for a senior position. Like, if you're gonna try to just BS your way into a job, maybe start with something a little lower down. Next story. We had some dumb interview questions we always had to ask, as they were set by corporate, but they got some interesting answers. One question was aimed at assessing how well employees present themselves. We worked with high-income clients, and entry-level employees had contact with them from time to time. The question was, if you spilled coffee on yourself on the way to work, what would you do? The answer they wanted was something about changing. 2 best responses. My entire wardrobe is black, so it wouldn't matter. Pull over and assess for burns. Next story. I will never forget the resume of a woman who felt compelled to provide a headshot. Looked like your average aging grandma redneck, complete with graying mullet, and the email address on her resume was an unprofessional email address. This was for a position in equipment finance. She did not make it to the personal interview rounds. Next story. Interviewing a software developer candidate. Initial phone screen. His phone was too good, too sensitive of a microphone. During some technical programming questions, I could hear him flipping pages in a book. I could tell from the cadence of his answers he was reading them. This was confirmed when at one point he lost his place and reread the same line. There was no second interview. Next story. 2 guys interviewed with me for a fairly basic, low-paying job. They turned up in tuxedos. Initially, I thought that was ironic, and I liked their vibe. But then one of them let off the loudest, longest fart I've ever heard. I could taste it. Then the tuxedos seemed kind of messed up. Next story. I had a dude show up for an in-person interview wearing a fez and sweatpants. Either of them would have been an odd choice separately. Together, though? Pick a lane, man. Next story. I was observing a science lesson being taught as part of the interview process. The guy started making jokes about how the chemicals looked like Class A drugs to a class full of 11 to 12-year-olds. Strangely, we did not hire him. Next story. At the time, Windows Server 2016 was becoming the standard server operating system. We had a guy who was looking for nearly a 6-figure salary and only had knowledge of Win98. It was really sad. His previous employer never updated anything, and this poor guy was tricked into thinking that was the norm. While yes, there are some circumstances that happens, it is not standard. Next story. Had a guy tell me I was doing his head in by asking him standard interview questions. He subsequently swore at the members of the interview panel and hung up on the Zoom interview a few minutes later. I had an interesting chat with the HR person who did the pre-vetting. Next story. Had a video interview with a dude for a product management spot. Dude looked like he just got out of bed, spent the first 5 minutes telling us how amazing he was, then 10 minutes telling us how everything we did was wrong. Our presentation deck we had sent him had typos, and if he joined the company, he would fix all of this and put us out of jobs. We didn't send him a presentation deck. He was applying for an outsourced position. The company he worked for had created an dummy, in general, this is what to expect PPT, and sent the deck. We advised him of this, and that we aren't the team that would even touch what he was talking about. He went, "Oh, then clearly this isn't a job I want," and ended the interview. We put him on the never hire list. Next story, in a restaurant, applying for a dish position. He got up after the interview was over and walked to another table, grabbed the Texas Pete hot sauce bottle, chugged it, not easy to do, did a couple laps around the dining room while headbanging, and then left. I wanted to hire the guy, but I never actually got his name because he didn't fill out an application. I was short-handed at the time, and he showed up at an opportune moment. I had the application on my clipboard for him to complete. Still think about that guy to this day. Next story. A woman started hiccuping about 3 minutes in, and by 10 minutes we reset the interview for the next morning. Hired her. Welcome gifts included a paper bag, a glass of water, and a long-handled teaspoon. She thought it was funny. When she was promoted to department manager, she announced that anyone who could hiccup for more than 5 hours would get a 2% pay raise, and told everyone that she had to go to the ER the evening after round 1 because it wouldn't stop. Next story. Interviewing for a childcare position, she left her 2-month-old alone in the car for the entire, almost 1.5-hour interview. One of the other employees noticed when she came back from lunch. It's literally a childcare facility. If she needed someone to watch her child while she interviewed, it wouldn't have been even a little bit of a problem. Next story. I had a resume come through that I rejected out of hand, but thanks to HR, I still had to interview. During early checks, I found the guy's identity had been stolen. Like bad. Everything. I tried to keep it together during the interview, but about 5 minutes in, I told the guy straight out, "You're not getting the job, and you have a serious problem to sort out." We spent about 15 minutes going over the depth of the identity theft. I'm honestly not sure if I was talking to the thief or the victim. Anyways, thanks for that super awkward interview, HR. Next story. Not to be a party pooper, but a lot of the wacky interview stories out there are people who don't really want the job, but have to prove they're doing interviews so they can continue to claim benefits or whatever. People who do wild, inappropriate things at the interview weren't really even trying to get the job. Next story. I'm a programmer. I usually ask a pretty basic question like, what things do you consider when writing or improving an algorithm? It's a pretty basic question, really. Most people usually say something about memory usage or the type of inputs and outputs, etc. One person, who was already a little nervous and clearly underqualified, went into a nervous rant about how algorithms are useless and how people use algorithms as a way to show intellectual superiority and stuff. Then she tried to grill me like, when have you actually used algorithms? So I gave her a couple examples, and she started to realize that algorithm is a pretty broad term and doesn't just refer to bubble sort and stuff. It was a pretty painful interview, and at one point, I started asking her about her dog or her summer plans, just to lighten the mood. Next story. A person I know went to interview for a state job. He did well with the hiring administrator. The administrator is a woman who was wearing open-toe high heels and had her toenails painted and had some glitzy jewelry on them. She took him to show him around, and for some reason he asked, "How did they put that on your toes?" Then he reached down and with his finger tried to peel off the jewelry. He didn't get the job. Next story. I once had an applicant sitting across from me doing the crackhead scratching thing. I hadn't even gotten to asking about past jobs when she started in on a long-winded rant about how she was trying to sue her past employer for wrongful termination. They had accused her of stealing. It was the height of COVID, and everyone needed workers. Nobody would falsely accuse someone of stealing when you need someone to do a cashier job. On that same day, the next applicant that walked in had literally stolen my assistant manager's TV. Next story. This one old lady came in. She was wearing a really large t-shirt with no bra. Her boobs were sagging down to be about in line with her belly button. Her nipples were cross-eyed, pointing off to different corners of the office. When asked about her favorite job ever, it was working for Pizza Hut, like when they had the sit-down restaurants everywhere. Oh cool, I thought. Finally, we can get somewhere in this interview, as her other responses to these types of questions has been short, without detail. But she somehow lit up to this one. So, did you like working with all the customers? No, I didn't help customers. I cleaned the bathrooms. Sigh. On to the next question. Before I can ask, she recalls one other tidbit. Sometimes when they got busy, they'd let me answer the phone. Ah, yes. Splendid detail. Next story. I interviewed a guy, 30 years old, wife and kids, for a job once. I asked, "What are your hobbies?" He told me he had one but stopped it immediately. I asked what that was. He had built a pipe bomb, and it blew up in his hands. His chest took most of the blast, and he was flown by chopper to hospital, where he was rushed to the ER surgery. He died twice on the table while they stitched him back together. He offered to show me the scars, and I declined. I asked why. He said he'd always wanted to make one. No plans, no blueprint, just build a pipe bomb. I said, "This was like when you were a teenager, right? Just doing dumb mess." "Oh no, I did this 3 years ago." He didn't get the job. Next story. Not an interviewer, but a position my boyfriend applied for. He went in to interview for this manual labor position that had been recommended to him by someone else. The interview went all right, despite the manager being quite gruff. My boyfriend calls back a few days later to follow up, and the guy goes off on him. He became really aggressive and kept saying, "I don't know you. What do you want from me? I don't know you. I don't owe you anything." The guy was extremely upset. He never quite figured out what he was upset about. It was weird. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. Next story. I work at a medical school, and we were hiring for an administrative assistant to work with our OB/GYN doctors. It should go without saying that most medical schools are still rather conservative fields to work in. This girl shows up for the interview, and part of the interview she gets asked, "Since you'd be working with doctors, you'd be seeing a lot of graphic images of the human body. Are you okay with that?" Without missing a beat, girl responds, "Yeah, I look at inappropriate photos." She did not get the job. Next story. I was part of a team interview for a technical position. We were his last interview. Halfway through, HR opened the door and said, "We're through, get out." Turns out the guy lied on his resume. Not only did he not have a PhD, he never finished college. HR did a background check and, surprise, we had flown him across the country, flew him back the same day. He did talk a good game, dropping journal references and names. Complete BS. Next story. A woman's husband showed up and asked about all the potential opportunities for him. He had gotten hired, and we were interviewing her as a courtesy, basically because academia. And he just steamrolled the whole thing, and it was utterly bizarre. And I was also so young at the time, I didn't understand I could just kick him out. But just so weird. Next story. Myself and 2 others were interviewing candidates for a medical scribe program. They chart for doctors in real time so the docs don't have to. Me. What do you like to do for fun? Candidate. I like to dissect things and see what's inside of them. So creepy. Next story. Not weird, but it took a really sad turn. Coworker was in a serious surfing accident. They destroyed her vocal cords. She can talk, but it sounds very scratchy. She was interviewing an applicant with me for an executive position over the phone. Interview went okay. Then when we wrapped up the call, they forgot to hang up and very loudly and clearly mocked my coworker's voice and commented about how horrible she sounded. They did not get the job. Next story. I helped my old boss screen applicants when I worked for a trucking company. Numerous potential drivers asked me if we drug tested, and then proceeded to tell me the last time they used marijuana or used something. Next story. You'd ask a pretty straightforward question like, "We use XYZ program along with XXX program. Can you tell us about your experience with these?" Then the dude would go off on a borderline rant about something not related, but still tie it back with, "And that's how we utilized that in my prior role." Asked how he dealt with difficult leaders, and he talked about how much smarter he was than everyone, and how it makes it easy to work with difficult people because they can be easily persuaded. The whole interview was like that. It was like he just heard what he wanted to. When we ended it, we stood up, shook his hand, and he said, "I look forward to starting here and being in your job in 18 months. We chose not to hire him and flagged his info as a solid "do not interview." I do wonder where he ended up. Next story. Mom came to the interview. I was a hiring director for software developers for a telecom. Brought this guy in for an interview. Came through security and asked for him. He stood up and an older woman stood up. "Da forget dat," is all I could think of see her stand. They both started trying to come through security with me. I told her that she was not invited to the interview. She told me that she had to come to the interview. That is when the interview ended. She asked for my boss's phone number. Oh, you betcha I gave it to her. I walked into my VP's office to a puzzled look on his face and him trying to not laugh. We would bring her up anytime we went out drinking. Next story. My employer told me one of the other candidates for my job ballsed up her interview massively when the panel asked her, what would you do if, really common scenario in this profession, type question. She said, I have no idea. The panel just waited, assuming she needed a bit of thinking time to put an answer together, and after a few seconds of silence, she then said, Are you deaf? I said I don't know. Next story. I did staffing for chemical plants, and one guy gave me a gift. One girl couldn't tell me any classes she took, and a lot of blaming politics for why they don't get raises, promotions at their current jobs. The excuses for failed drug tests are more entertaining though. Next story. Asked what they wanted to do with their career at the company, and they described something that has absolutely nothing to do with our field of work at all. Took me a second to figure out how to politely respond. Next story. I was on an interview panel. We were interviewing a lateral employee, a middle-aged white woman. We're a dispatch center in a diverse area, city and rural and suburb, about 300,000 population, all sorts of stuff, near several military bases. She moved to the area from Montana or Utah or something, and had previous job experience, so it was going fine. The interview had a series of questions, and they're like obvious questions. Only Sloth from the Goonies would forget up, you know? Not only that, they were yes and no questions. One of the questions was, do you have experience working with people from different ethnic and racial backgrounds? Fairly simple. There is no wrong answer, but it helps to see if you're a good fit for the job, because you're going to deal with lots of different types of people regularly. Her answer. Oh yes, I've worked with a racial slur lots of times before. I was so stunned, I couldn't say anything. I just laughed. Training supervisor ended the interview right then and there. We did not end up hiring her. Next story. I was visiting a friend in London who worked in one of the famous coffee shops there. The next morning, he had an interview to run a new cafe that was opening in a few weeks. When I woke up, I had a message on my phone to meet him at the new cafe. I got there, and he looked wrecked, dirty, eyes hanging out of his head, struggling to stay upright. Turns out his girlfriend had broken up with him the night before and locked him out of their flat. He slept in the gutter outside, or tried to, and after explaining this to the new cafe owner, I did his interview for him while he slept on the floor. I'd worked with him a few years before, so I answered with, well, he was great at this, and his best attributes blah blah blah. I even did a practical test, showing them his methods. He got the job in the end, and now has one of the most successful shops of his own in Berlin. Next story. Used to be a hiring manager for a large company, and one girl I interviewed literally got mad at me when I told her to put her phone away, then proceeded with an attitude for the rest of the interview. When I asked her if she even wanted to be here, she got mad, called me a slur, and left. She had the audacity to call a few days later and ask about the interview and if she was hired. When I told her no, she called me a slur again and hung up. To this day, I don't know if she was playing some elaborate prank or what, but her audacity was so astounding, I'll never forget the whole ordeal. Next story. Question was, why do you want to work here? Answer, X found me at my current job and informed the courts, and they started garnishing my wages. I need to find another job that my ex doesn't know about so I can quit. Didn't seem like he should even get points for honesty here. Next story. In early 2021, I was chief operating officer of a large engineering firm in Texas and was interviewing candidates for a vice president of sales and marketing position. I had been off work the week prior for a family emergency, and this particular candidate's original interview had been rescheduled to that day. The candidate began his interview complaining about having to wear a mask and proceeded to explain to me how moronic a policy it was, and how the virus was fake, and how he couldn't believe the government would force such ridiculous requirements on businesses. I calmly stood up and told him that the family emergency, which had resulted in our rescheduled interview, had been my traveling to stand outside the window of a hospital in a vain attempt to comfort my mother in her final moments of what was a truly terrible death from COVID. I then, less graciously, told him to get the forget out. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. Next story. I had a guy bring his mom into the interview. Like, not just to wait, actually tried to come into the boardroom with him. The interview did not go forward. Next story. Guy shows up in a $2,000 purple suit, no tie, red striped shirt, gold rings, huge gold necklace, purple pork pie hat, and Italian loafers. Looked like a 1970s pimp or strip club owner. refused to answer most of the questions, saying, "Come on, guys, that question is beneath me. Give me something harder." Simply oozed confidence and swagger. For a junior systems administrator position, wanted $250,000 salary. We did not hire him. Next story. I was an engineering manager in a subsidiary of a large graphics company in the 90s. One candidate for a software dev position came in to interview and told us he had written a song about us. During one of the interviews, he proceeded to sing it for us. It was awkward and charming at the same time. For other reasons, he didn't get the job. Next story. Not my story. My daughter was interviewing a young woman for a position at a very large bookstore chain. At one point in the interview, my daughter asked the young woman what was one thing she liked about herself. The young woman thought for a few seconds, then said she liked that her boobs were big. Next story. Used to like to throw in random questions that would show you how the person thinks. So one time asked, "If you were a vegetable, what would you be?" And her answer, quick as a button, "I would be a cucumber so I could forget myself." Next story. I work in pharma, and once a guy came in and cried because making life-saving products is such a noble calling. Not like teary, wet eyes, but impassioned sobs. No, he did not get the job. Next story. Was part of a committee interviewing for individuals for the supervisor of my department. I had 3 interesting interviews. 1. When asked how would they handle a last-minute project with a short deadline that couldn't be reasonably achieved in the time frame under normal circumstances, they said they would do anything to get it done, including requiring the team to work long hours. All of us were overtime exempt and underpaid. A real case of not knowing your audience. 2. We had one person who had no experience in the field that was only being interviewed because she knew the director. She didn't even know what the team did and acted like the job was already hers. To be fair, that is how her predecessor got the job and had the same experience. But that person was both still with the organization and still banging the director. But that person only lasted 3 months in the position, hadn't gone through an interview process, and the board had intervened since the current interview was scheduled, placing the director on probation and suspending any personnel decisions he could make. 3. One person, who ended up being the runner-up, was used by the director as an example of bad work in the field in a speech. While he didn't mention her by name, he mentioned her current organization and the paper she wrote that had been given to him to review. She used it as an example of her work in the interview. The primary person turned down the offer, and she was offered the position. By then, she had heard of it and turned down the offer too. I left before the 3rd and 4th choices also turned it down. Next story. When I was the manager of a small locally owned coffee house, we were interviewing for a new barista. A guy turned in his resume with no relevant coffee experience, but we decided to interview him anyway. He showed up in an ill-fitting brown suit, which was not our vibe. But fine, way to make an effort. I greeted him, asked if he'd like something to drink from the coffee bar, and he said, "Oh no, I never drink coffee," which, okay. I then introduced myself. I'm Leather Aardvark, the manager here at the coffee house, and then asked why he wanted to work with us as a barista. He then started in on a spiel about all of his management experience and how he will be an excellent manager and is well qualified for this job. This was not reflected in his resume. It was probably about 10 minutes of the qualities he liked in himself. I just sat there stunned. I let him know that we didn't currently have a manager position open and asked if he was interested in the open barista position. He was not. Only interested in management. And here's the thing. If I thought he'd be a better manager than I was, I would have suggested hiring him, but he would not be a better manager. He would also not be a good barista. I'm not sure what job that guy would be good at, but I hope he found it. Next story. Not so much an interview as a trial that went extremely poorly. I needed a position filled at my company, and it turned out my friend's wife had the skill set we needed, so we took her on board, and things immediately went awry. She couldn't follow simple instructions and had to have every task spoon-fed to her, to the point that I might as well do the work myself, and the work she did produce would almost always not be what I asked for. I relayed this to my friend, and her solution floored me. She dead-ass offered for me to hire her to interpret between her wife and the rest of the team. She expected me to hire her as a translator when English was all our first language. It was obscene. Nonetheless, I declined, and our friendship ended shortly after. Next story. Context. I have partial heterochromia. Both of my eyes are primarily green. My right eye is about half yellow, and my left eye has a large yellow blob. I'm used to people commenting on it when they notice. So I'm interviewing this candidate, and he is making intense eye contact. every question was met with a delayed response or a request to repeat it. At the end of the interview, I asked him if he had any questions. Word is bond. He actually asked me if he could take a picture of my eyes. He was not qualified for the position. I try to keep my emotions out of the process, especially with a no. I was happy in this case because I'm almost certain he would have murdered me for my eyeballs. Next story. I had an interview scheduled. On the surface, their resume looked solid and didn't see any problems. The young person walks in and is clearly nervous. No problem, as I understand it can be an unusual situation. However, I notice he takes out his phone and says, "Can we call my parents?" I honestly thought he was making a joke. I tried several times to keep it casual and just have a conversation. On paper, he had all the qualifications, but definitely seemed to have some form of Asperger's or ADHD. I'm not a health professional. According to his LinkedIn profile, he seemed to be doing well last I checked, but always felt bad for how he seemed to be sheltered with so much potential. Next story. I've been in countless roles where I have to hire people, but the one that stands out more than any other was when, while working as a lead trainer for a national telecom company, I interviewed a guy for a sales position that absolutely nailed the interview. I couldn't believe how good he was and how good his answers were compared to the usual dredge we talked to. Then, at the very end, he told me he'd binged on bars and tar the night before, and, next story, had someone come in for an interview and 10 minutes in, they went to the bathroom, for a long time. Came back like nothing had happened, only to excuse themselves again. An educated guess is that it turned out they had progressively worse food poisoning, and the poor person was stuck in our bathroom for about 90 minutes. We also only had one bathroom, so we had to go across the street. Eventually, they were well enough to slip out. That bathroom was unusable for the rest of the day. They seemed like a good candidate too. Never heard from them again though. Next story. I had a real-life Dwight Schrute who not only dedicated a significant section of their resume to their karate and martial arts experience, but made it a point to connect every regular interview question to something martial arts related. The job has nothing to do with martial arts. In fact, it's a pretty standard corporate desk job. We identify fraud, but no one is kicking down doors. They did not get the job. Next story. Interviewed this guy for a programming position in React. He continuously talked about how Flash was the only good thing. Everything else was a waste of time. It's criminal that they got rid of it. He hates programming and having to use anything instead of Flash. Like non-stop for 15 minutes. Flash good, everything else bad. When we denied him, he called our HR lady a stupid, difficult person. Next story. Guy told me how he screwed over some clients. Not wanting to waste time, I told him I wasn't going to hire him. He told me I was wrong. I told him that I was absolutely right, that I wasn't hiring him. He said it was because I was afraid that he'd take my job. I laughed and said no matter the reason, he wasn't hired. He stood up, broke the chair he was sitting in, and stormed out. Next story. Not me, but my mom. She works from home and used to do interviews, and she would leave some literally laughing at how bad they were. Once she asked someone, "So your resume says call center experience. What kind of call center experience do you have?" And the candidate said, "I worked the headset at Wendy's." Next story. The candidate told me that he believed God had led him to this opportunity. Unfortunately, he was really well qualified and had come highly recommended by a current great employee, so we hired him. Next story. We were hiring a computer security guy. One guy could not answer any of the questions, and when he realized he had failed the interview, spent 2 solid hours whining about how unfair life was. Next story. Not long after I was promoted into manager of the IT department at a subsidiary of a public company, meaning we worked with the corporate IT group who handled infrastructure while we managed subsidiary-specific systems, I had 2. 1. The first was someone interviewed for a support technician role. I always throw out scenarios based on incidents I have experienced. One such was a DHCP issue where people were getting addresses from something other than our systems, the result of someone bringing a home router and plugging it into our network. The person interviewed was a bit stumped and made a few reasonable answers, which is what I kind of look for, seeing what steps they would take to figure it out. The response was to yell at me and say, "That is not allowed." Yes, you are correct. It is not allowed. However, users sometimes do things like that and not realize it becomes a disruption. It is our job to find and resolve the issue. And again, they yelled, "But that is not allowed." Loud enough that people outside of the conference room I was using for this could hear. 2. I had a very confident candidate tell me he knew what he was doing and did not have to use Google to fix problems. If you have worked in IT, the ability to research issues is a must. The response was pretty arrogant, and I only say it is weird because as someone looking to hire you, being so arrogant that you state you don't have to do what is one of the most common aspects of that particular job just made me think, this is someone who got by on others basically doing their work. Next story. People coming in pajamas, flip-flops, stained t-shirts, sweatpants, completely non-matching clothes, people covered in animal hair and smell, people with no personality at all, not smiling. I would ask questions to these people like, "What makes you smile?" And they would, with a dead stare, no expression, answer, "My kids." I would hire people for jobs that require a lot of energy. So during the interview, we would walk around the building, upstairs, downstairs. The number of people who couldn't make it up the stairs without sounding like they were going to die is uncountable. This is after asking them questions about being able to do the job, which they would always answer yes without any hesitation. Customer service interviews, where I would ask questions like, "What would you do if someone had X issue and came to you upset?" And they would answer, "Well, first they're gonna have to calm down," or "I'm gonna tell them about themselves 'cause I don't deal with that. Ill snap." So many interviews. So many people who I'm sure tell others, "I don't know, I guess no one's hiring. I can't find a job anywhere." Next story. I was the interviewee for a travel nurse job over the phone. Every question the manager asked, she answered about herself with some great story about how great of a nurse she was. I don't think I actually answered a single question in the interview. This was at the beginning of COVID, when most of the interviews were, "When can you start?" She asked if I had questions, and I asked a couple, and she went on a long rant about how their travelers get the worst assignments and are generally abused, I'm paraphrasing, because they make so much more money than staff. This was before the rates were insanely high. I left confused and didn't take the assignment. I was mostly interested because I did the city it was in, but she sounded absolutely crazy. Next story. Guy came in for an interview wearing hat and slouched in the chair. Guy came in with dirty nails, damp-smelling clothes, and the greasiest hair I've ever seen. Girl came in with jean shorts and t-shirt. The amount of people who were okay for the work, warehouses work, small stationery orders, and seemed keen, just never showed up. Place was okay to work for, well above minimum wage, various shifts to choose from, subsidized canteen, and pool tables in the break room. One guy didn't turn up, so I phoned him, and he said his cat was missing and he wouldn't be able to concentrate if he came in. Next story. I was once conducting first round of interviews over the telephone with a few candidates. This was just a short preliminary round of having a chat with the candidate and scheduling their in-person interview. At around 2 p.m. in the day, I call up a potential candidate, introduce myself, and the purpose of my call. I was promptly told in a very lazy voice, "I am sleeping. Could you please call me back in the evening?" It is still the most astounding call I have ever made. Next story. I was in a group interview with about 8 or so other people for a camp counselor position at the YMCA. One of the questions they asked us was, if you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be? We went around the room and each answered. This one chick talked about how she would have wanted to meet her kid that she aborted a few years ago. Honest answer, but maybe not the right setting. She did not get the job. Next story. Dude came in sweaty as hell with a large briefcase. Not the kind of role where you'd bring one to an interview. Told us about his history fighting as a defendant in court. Then, when asked if he had any questions, asked, "So, do you like me?" My manager interviewed him with me. Bless her brave soul. She responded that he intimidated her. He was scary. She was frank but cool AF. Next story. One of the weirdest questions I was ever asked in my years of contract work was, how many sick days do you think a person should have? It was one of those questions that I answered by the books. But it seemed like it was a trap question. Kinda glad I didn't get the job, because it gave me vibes for the people I would have worked with. No answer I gave made them happy. Next story. Okay, thanks for coming in. I think we can agree this was a good talk. When would you be able to start? I'm free on Monday. I do have to say I'm going to Australia for 3 months on the 21st. I see. Well, if the position is still open in, what is that even? August? You are welcome to let us know if you are still interested. Will do. I mean, what the heck? Next story. I once had a student with a finished bachelor degree in electrical engineering who could not show me a coil or even a resistor on a PCB laid in front of them. Another applicant started smoking cigarettes during an online interview. We were so baffled, we couldn't even say anything about it. Next story. Someone at my company was interviewing for a job in my department. They were doing so poorly in the interview, despite me trying to hide how badly they were doing, that they rescinded their application 30% of the way through the interview. It was rough. Next story. I had some weird mess happen to be because of a naive recruiter. She had no idea what we were taught, and she asked me very touchy things. After that, whatever candidate showed up, she asked them to make triangles in PowerPoint and hired them. Her loss. Next story. Young guy interviewing for a supervisor job at a distribution center. Showed up to the interview with his mom, not just as his ride. She insisted on joining us for the actual interview. Was displeased when we said no. He didn't get the job. Next story. Two of the weirdest were for the same basic position in an office. He refused to shake my coworker's, a woman, hand. Barely looked at her. A girl arrived stoned, like she drove to the interview with Cheech and Chong stoned. Next story. A 28-year-old mom who brought his mom to the interview. A woman who had my artwork in her portfolio and claimed it was her own. People who have no idea what is on their resume. Next story. My good friend went to a job interview for a call center. One of the questions was, if you were naked on a desert island, would you look for food, shelter, or clothing first? And why? Next story. Her cam dies as she is stumbling through her introduction, background. She phones in, said her laptop battery died, and out of nowhere starts speaking impeccable English. Next story. Cussed non-stop during the interview. Told me that he didn't really know anything about the company or a position. On the way out, he asked if we did background checks. Next story. Genuinely ran a Zoom interview where the candidate was sitting in a toilet cubicle at the office with no headphones in so we could hear every time someone flushed. Next story. A mid-interview fart that sounded like the horn section of an orchestra during an earthquake. Luckily, they just left so we didn't have to sit with the smell. Next story. I had a guy who could not take a cue to leave. He brought a folder with every award and accolade he'd ever gotten, most of which did not apply to this job. I kept doing the wrap-up thing, thanking him, standing, giving expectations on when he would hear something back, and he would not leave. Asked to use the restroom, get a cup of coffee, and then came back to my office to warble on. I couldn't get past his huge long fingernail either. Finally, after 2 hours, I had enough and had to get aggressive to get him to leave. He knew my husband, and we run into him from time to time. Awkward. Next story. As a contractor, I typically don't even interview. It's more like whoever can work a full day without quitting. I have a list of prelim questions I ask on the phone, but none of those will necessarily disqualify you from the position. It just helps me narrow down what level of piece of mess you are from 1 to 10 to me. People might say I'm discriminatory, but everyone who applies to my job is a piece of mess in some way. Very rarely do I get lucky. Last year, I was running a 2-man crew plus myself, and on larger jobs, 4 to 6. My first week in the season, I burned through 19 guys in 5 days. I'd have 2 guys show up, or not show up, in the morning, and have 2 guys ready to replace them at lunch every day. Then, after all that mess, the guy who I kept on with me, I had to fire him for blatant drug use and racist behavior. My next full-timer fired for blatant drug use and racist behavior. My last guy last year was actually one of like 5 guys I've ever had work for me that wasn't a piece of mess, and amazingly surpassed all my expectations. Albeit, my bar is set very low. Next story. The candidate was great, smart, and qualified. One might say a slam dunk. The one hang-up, he didn't make eye contact with me in the interview room once. Perfectly accomplished, but my gut was screaming at me that this guy was not it.